my phone rings, and it's Myrtle Beach Police Department. And I said, Ms. Hughes, we got your daughter. I said, is she okay? And they're like, yeah, she's fine. She's fine. And I said, they said, what do you want us to do with her? And I immediately went from where I'm at right now to take her to jail. Take her to jail.
Righteous anger.
Take her to jail. And, they had sent literally almost a SWAT team in there.
Yeah.
She said that they didn't even, it's like a no knock, like the door just came busting open.
So she was in a house.
She was in the condo. Yes, a condo, multiplex. And he had told them that he was going to leave in the wee hours of the next morning and go on a business trip, but that they could stay there, that it was paid for, that they could stay there as long as they wanted. And he had bought a bunch of groceries and that kind of stuff. The truth is, he was going to drug them.
Wow.
The deal was done. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It was over. And he was going to leave them. And then, just like in the movie, the bad guys are going to come in
and get them.
And they're gone. That's how close we were.
Welcome to the Genesis Project. Join us as we apply the Word of God to our daily lives and cover various topics for the growth of our mind and spirit. Hey, everybody, just wanted to say welcome back to the Genesis Project. We have a friend of ours that's going to be joining us for this recording. His name's Kevin. I met Kevin in the hospital of all places, and he was actually a patient of mine. And what was interesting is that, typically when you're making rounds in the hospital, things are go, and you don't have too much time to linger. And when I went into Kevin's room, the stories and the testimonies and the details of his life that he shared with me kept me in that room for hour or hour and a half at a time. And I had to force myself to leave so that I could keep up with my patients that I had to see. But I was just so impacted by Kevin's testimony and what God did in his life. And we asked him to join us as a guest and just share a little bit more about what his story is, not just what his story is, but the impact that God had through his story on the lives of his children and the life of his family and those around him. So Kevin, we just want to say welcome to the Genesis Project.
I appreciate it. I tell people, more times than not that God puts people in your path for specific purposes in a specific season.
100%. Sometimes
you know what it is quickly, like this instance, and other times it may not manifest itself for many, many, many years, but I believe that with my heart that, everybody that's truly meaningful in your life, there's a purpose for them. Yeah. And this is kind of a short time frame, but we're here because, it's what God's called me to do, and be fearless and unapologetic about my faith.
Amen.
Not worry about who I'm sharing it with, and let him worry about watering the seed that I plant, but in this case, it's turned into something completely different. But that's interesting.
Yeah. Would you like to tell us what happened within your life and what happened to your daughter briefly before we continue?
Yeah. So 2015, the end of 2014, pretty tough year. Amber was battling depression, tried to kill herself twice, ended up in the psych ward a couple times, and then she ran away twice. And September 2015 was the second runaway. It's like September 12th. And, she ran away, and pretty quickly I realized it was different. And through, again, somebody God put in my life 20 years prior almost, figured out she was in a human trafficking situation. And, and I didn't know what I was going to do, didn't know if I'd ever see her again, and but God had a plan, and literally through a series of miracles saved her life.
Wow.
So Yeah.
And we'll get to that later.
Yeah, we'll go into some more details about that. Kevin, give us a little bit more of a background about you, and just so those who are tuning into this have a little bit of a better idea of where you come from, what your background is.
And what you do now.
Yeah. Okay. I grew up here in Western North Carolina. I'm one of the few, I guess, OGs.
Yeah, one of the few.
I'm an OG.
Sure.
I'm not a transplant, but left for 8.5 years, joined the Air Force after high school, got off of active duty, and then worked in the trucking and insurance business, and stayed in the Air Force Reserves until 2014. I met God, I was saved early, 14, 15 years old. Got baptized twice. I guess I wasn't sure the first time. I went to a revival, and preacher hit me in the head pretty hard, and I was like, man, I better wash this stuff off again. I gotta,
just to be sure,
right? Twice just to make sure that I'm clean. But no, and then I went in the Air Force, and Satan is the master counterfeiter, and he uses things that are appealing to us,
right?
To distract us. I firmly believe that once you're God's, you're always God's, and you're never going to be dealt back to the world and to the devil, and you can't lose your salvation. But what the devil can and will do aggressively is keep you from sharing your faith with other people. At that point, it's not about the battle, it's about the war that he's trying to win. And so he did that to me. Growing up in the South, I was a huge fan of NASCAR. Most people around here are, and I admire those guys, and would go stand in line for hours to catch an autograph. And then as I got into the commercial insurance business in 2011, I was in the business earlier than that, but in 2011 the company I worked for bought an agency that insured most of the NASCAR teams and drivers, and I went from an outsider to an insider because you got to know them all, and you became part of the circle. And I was going to the races and going to their events and going to their parties, and it's kind of wild. And the devil was using all that. Say, man, isn't this great? Look at all the money you're making. Look at the people you're hanging out with. You just hung out with Blake Shelton or Jake Owen or all these race car drivers and stuff, and he just he knocks you off path to keep you lost. And so I did that, and I'm actually still involved in racing, just not NASCAR anymore, but I work for myself now in the sports marketing and consulting business for racing, mostly drag racing and NHRA stuff, but I've had to kind of look at things with a different lens and not let those distractions and, the people that I'm still affiliated with, some of them keep me off my goal, like I was before. So
you still connected with some of them?
I am. Yeah. One of the, crew chiefs, Rodney Childers was Kevin Harvick's crew chief. He played a part in my daughter being saved, just with a tweet that ended up being seen over 3 million times, so they got two tips and clues off of that. But I still talk to him today and a couple of the drivers, so yeah, I still do know some of those guys.
Can you cover about how the connection to NASCAR, how your career affected your spiritual life? What did it lead into? And then maybe even after about your family and how it affected you raising your children.
It's a huge distraction, right? The devil uses anything he can to distract you from what you should be doing.
Yeah.
And growing up, and very modest means, having money all of a sudden was a problem. All of a sudden there's nothing off limits, it felt like, and so the ability to buy the things of the world that I always wanted was a problem. The devil uses that, chase the next shiny object, look at this, isn't this awesome? You don't realize in the moment that it's him. You say, man, look how blessed I am, but really you're just being knocked off track.
Right.
And and then being in that circle and that lifestyle, I don't want to bash, it's not everybody, but there's certain elements in every group that are not savory, I guess, and the lifestyle in general. And it's just, it's really easy to get distracted from, what you should be doing and where you should be when you're focused on making money and who you're associated with and who you're hanging out with versus focusing on your children and your family. So it had a very, very huge negative impact because I thought I was being a really good dad, honestly, but I was just being a present dad, not a present in the moment, you know, check on them every day, I love you, those kind of things, but not really involved in what was going on in their life. Like, you know, what's affecting you? Why are you depressed? You know, what are you really doing when I'm not talking to you?
Right.
And it allowed the devil to engage them because I wasn't holding on to them, you know?
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting. You touch on, I think, something that's so valuable as a parent. You know, I have young children myself, and you know, you mentioned not just being present, but it's almost like you have to be not just present but influential. Your faith has to become their faith.
Correct.
Your passion has to become their passion. The things that God stirs in you that comes from above, you plant into their lives. And I love how you mentioned not just being a present parent, not just being present, but we have to be diligent, not just to be present, but influential.
Right.
So that the decisions our children make when we aren't around, when we as parents aren't around, that they are picking the things of God, that they are picking the things from above.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if you think about it, in today's society, because of the keep up with the Joneses mentality, right? Mm-hmm. You know, everybody measures success on the size of your house, what you're driving, how big your bank account is.
Yeah.
Both parents in the majority of today's households have a career. And so we are leaving our children to be influenced and raised the majority of the time they're awake by people who may or may not, in this case, share our moral compass.
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting.
And that's the schools, that's social media, that's their friends who have also been influenced by the schools and social media. You know, I tell people all the time, the devil has, I did a podcast on my own recently on incrementalization, you know. So incrementally, the moral compass of our society has been moved from way over here, one little tiny step at a time, to here.
Right.
To where we now accept things that are, if they'd have thrown them at us 20 years ago, we would
be bizarre.
Well, yeah, like, what are you doing, you know? But because it's just little doses, you know, transgender people reading to kids in public schools and, you know, things that you're just like, what? Bizarre.
Yeah.
So I think that, you know, the whole of our society forces us to feel that need for success and those kind of things. And then we allow other people to raise our children for us by default, because, you know, if you've got a career and your wife's got a career, you know, you send them off to school 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, you come home at 6 o'clock, they're in bed by 9, you've got 3 hours a day with those children.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you're lucky, if they're not on Facebook, if they're not on Instagram, if they're not Snapchatting each other and using all these other means to gain attention that you're not giving them.
Yeah.
They're getting attention from negative places. And so that's really, you know, a challenge.
Mm-hmm. As a future father, I know both of you guys are fathers. And in this kind of society, you mentioned something that a lot of people are actually going through, where in the Slavic community, it's slightly different. I feel like we have more the father working and the mother taking care of the children. Mm-hmm. But it's very different in the American society. Even me and my wife both work. Mm-hmm. So both of us are working right now. But how do you raise kids or try to raise kids when both parents are working? I feel like a lot of millennials my age actually have this question. How do we properly take time to invest into our kids so they don't go off into the world?
Man, that's a tough one. I'm a big believer in private education that's faith-based, you know, where you know that during those hours that they're in school that the people influencing them have the same moral compass you have.
Yeah.
It's cost prohibitive to most. And so, but churches, you know, like both the churches that I, you know, attend, I go to 2 churches.
Nice.
Baptized twice, go to 2 churches.
You know, and I get one thing from one and something else from another one. And it's kind of a unique situation, but both of them have academies. And they've got scholarships for people who can't afford, and, you know, people donate to those scholarships. And I know that my granddaughter, who's going to one of those schools, is getting the right guidance at school. So I would encourage parents to apply for those scholarships first. The public schools can be detrimental, but you just have to really do research. Like, you'd be shocked at the things I found out, the apps that are on their phones, and keep them away from smartphones until they just absolutely threaten to do something bad over it, because that really, to me, is one of the worst things you could do, is to give them a phone at 10 years old and expect them to be able to mail it.
Yeah, I mean, you open a can of worms with that for sure. I think North Carolina just passed a law. You mentioned schools, about like if you want to send your kids to a private school or some other non-public institution, that you can apply for like a tax credit towards that.
Okay.
Because we're paying taxes for public education, but if you're not sending your children to public education, you could at least recoup some of that and offset it. So maybe that's an option for people. It's tough. I believe that regardless of the dynamics of the world that we live in today, the darker that the world gets that we live in today, we're called to be the light in that.
That's correct.
In that era.
Yeah.
So our children, when people talk to me and they say, "Man, aren't you worried about your kids, raising kids in a situation and in a world like we live in today?" And I say, no, they're born for such a time as this. This is their time to bring, to stand on boldness and faith and be unshaken, like their grandfathers and their forefathers before them. And, I think that we as Christians shouldn't shy away from the things that the world might throw at our children or at, our families, because God has called us to be overcomers in the midst of that. So, I believe that when we live a true life of faith, it doesn't mean there's not going to be hardships or challenges or circumstances like we might hear today with Kevin's testimony.
Yeah.
But what it does mean is that at the end of the path, it's not how we start the race, it's how we end the race. But at the end of the path, God is directing us towards this ultimate goal of representing him well on this earth.
I think I would, one of the things that came to my mind while you were talking, to your point, the first chapter of the book of James talks about the challenges that we are going to face.
Yeah.
I think, as a Christian, that's the other thing I say is, people often say, well, God's not going to give me anything I can't handle. I don't think that's true at all. I absolutely vehemently say you're wrong. Because if that were the case, if you could just meander through life because you got saved and nothing's too big for you to overcome, why would you ask him for help?
Yeah.
Why would you call on him? He wants you to lean on him. So there are going to be challenges that he allows to come into our life. So we will humble ourselves and call on him to help us get through those. And these are those two situations. And so as a parent, if I had it to do over again, all right, if I'm looking back, whatever time I had with my children face to face, I wouldn't spend it in front of the television.
Oh yeah, that's a big one.
I wouldn't spend it. Everybody sits around today looking at their smartphones. I would find a way to engage them and help them grow their faith, so that I knew when they went out into the world, if they had to go to a public school or go into a situation where their friends were trying to lead them astray, that they knew who to call for help.
Yeah.
Not me, but God, right? That they knew to dig in and say, hey, look, teach them to trust their spidey senses. So, so to speak, look, this is wrong. I don't want to do this, and help them identify what's evil versus what's good versus what's being thrown at them while they're not in front of you. So that would be the first thing I would do. I'd be like, that thing's got to go, bye, get out of here. And then we'd sit down and do some, try to do as much family Bible study as we could.
And spend as much time together. One thing I wanted to add on to what you guys were saying, like I said, I don't have children yet. But one thing I've studied is that I'm married. Your wife and whoever my future children, your future children, they see hypocrisy. They see us for who we actually are. We can be
home.
at home. We can be whoever we want to be in front of people. We can be respected. We can be honored within our ministries. But who we are at home, how we behave ourselves, what we spend most time in, is what we actually are. And we sometimes in some ways ruin our own testimony to our children and our wives whenever we act one way in public and act a different way in private. How are you supposed to train your kid to love the Lord if you don't spend enough time at home with God in prayer and in study, in fellowship? You see what I mean? That's what you spoke about.
100%. Yeah. I mean, to me, you are who you are in private. That's the you know, if you're fake in private, you know, living a different life than what you are in public, then who are you really?
Yeah.
I mean,
Amen.
That's a question you got to ask yourself.
Amen. And I want to talk about the financial situation. I'm not going to get too deep into it, but we're going to continue into the trafficking afterwards. What would you say the success? How does it impact your life? How did it impact your life when you reached a certain level of success? What were the negative and positive things within that success that you reached?
It's hard for me to really say that they're, you know, positive is you don't really have to worry about, you know, putting food on the table and putting a roof over your head and having clothes. The negative is you almost want for nothing. So I feel like I've got a lot of really uber wealthy, you know, connections and friends. And I worry that they don't see the need for God because they feel like they can purchase anything that they desire in the flesh. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, you don't need anything.
You don't need anything. You know, why would you call on God for help if you can literally there's no limit to the things you can buy. And I worry about that. You know, the Bible says, you know, tells us very clearly the rich man's going to struggle.
Yeah,
right?
hard to get in.
And so you have to find that balance of what you do with what you've been blessed with.
Yeah. Okay.
And who you support and those kind of things. So it gives you the ability to not worry, but it also worries me, but you know, at times because of that statement in the Bible. Yeah. You know, the eye of the needle. You know, it's just I'm like, Lord, that's not the way I think. I promise.
Do you feel like as you know, you've grown in your faith, that you know, I believe that you know, the wealthy individuals can make it into heaven just the same.
Without question. But
I totally agree and understand where you're coming from. Do you think that as you walked out, you know, your faith, and as you walked out your faith, and your faith grew, that the challenge of juggling, how should I phrase this? You know, did it feel like it was easier to lose it all when your faith grew?
Yeah.
Like in other words,
100%.
You know,
100%. I'll tell everybody right now, I grew up for very modest means.
Yeah.
And I would be fine going back to that because I know God's got my back.
And that's because God's got your back. You feel like it's because of faith.
Yeah. And to your point, I had to come to two of the second incident, and we'll talk about in a different time, but the two most impactful incidences in my life, there was no amount of money we were going to fix them.
Ooh, yeah.
None.
Yeah.
There was no, trust me, there is no amount of money in the world that was going to fix that. So I had one person to call on, and that was God. And that's kind of where you have to get. And then once you realize, I can't buy my way out of this.
Right.
You know? And I worry about people who don't ever get to that point where they don't feel that they have to make that call for help if they can constantly feel like they've bought their way out of it. I think that's the difference, you know, in the faith process, right?
Yeah.
You know, and so once you get there, then you refocus and like, hey, I don't want to feel like that again.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, he's trying to talk to me, he's trying to show me something, and in spite of that, in 2015, I wandered for 4 or 5 more years, you know, even after he saved Amber's life. I mean, I knew in 2015 I needed to tell that story, you know, what we're going to start talking about tonight. And I waited until 2022 3
Right.
to start the process. 8 years.
Well, let's get into that.
Yeah, let's get into that. Lead us up to that moment where you're talking about you had to, you could only call on one person to help you, one being to help you, and that was God. And lead us up to that moment in time.
Well, it was September the 12th of 2015. I got a call from my ex-wife in the morning, and she said Amber had run away. And it was the second time that had happened. And the first time we found her fairly quickly, but this time I went over to the other girl's house that was involved in the situation, and she had a long history of doing this with older men, and she would stay gone sometimes a couple weeks.
Amber was gone?
No,
or this
the other girl would stay gone a couple weeks in her previous excursions. And Amber had met her in the psychological ward in the hospital. And, they advise you to not let them become friends, because even though they tell you, well, we're helping each other, they're really not helping each other, right?
Yeah.
To recover from this kind of thing. She met her after she tried to kill herself. And so at the time, my ex-wife and I were on polar opposites as far as a relationship, and there's a lot of tension, in which that's another story. That's another God story, that now we're best friends, and she and my wife are best friends, and God healed that. And I'll tell people frequently, it doesn't matter how bad the situation, what you've done. If you allow him to do it, God can use anything you've done negatively for his glory to show people that he's made a change that people have to look at and say, there's no way that happened other than God.
Yeah, it becomes a testimony.
Yeah, because of the testimony. And my ex-wife and my relationship being healed, and the relationship between my ex-wife and my wife being healed is one of those stories. Mm-hmm. But at the time, we weren't there. So she allowed her to become friends with that girl. Yeah. And they were hanging out together. And there was a gym owner here locally who had used the other girl as a teenage prostitute and had used her to move drugs. And the initial plan was that they were, and I found all this out later in the debrief, that they were going to take her to Florida and try to convince her to do that for them in Florida. And he gave them some money and a phone to run away and to lay low for a couple days, and then he was going to pick them up and take them to Florida. And the initial place they went, found out they were runaways and kicked them out. So they used the money that he gave them and paid somebody to take them down to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, which is where that girl went on family vacation annually. And so she knew her way around. She knew, the resorts and the restaurants and the whole scene down there. And so they ended up down there. I went to the house the first day and immediately had this gut feeling that it wasn't normal. And I have no explanation other than it was, God saying, hey, buddy, don't just leave this alone. You gotta do something here. Yeah. And so local police didn't really want to have a lot to do with it because of that girl's history. She had always come back, and they didn't have a lot of interest in it. And so I called a friend of mine that I hadn't talked to, and golly, at that time it had to be 13 years probably. He and I were youth counselors at Biltmore Church in the late 90s, and up until I went crazy and went into the world. And after my divorce, we didn't, become not friends. We just didn't talk anymore, And so once I realized that the local authorities weren't really going to help me out much, I called him, and he was the very high up in the SBI here in North Carolina.
Can you explain what SBI is?
State Bureau of Investigation. Okay. So it's a state version of the FBI.
Okay.
They've got some pretty cool tools, NSA type stuff to track and trace and do those kind of things. But it was just like I had just talked to him the day before when I called him and said, hey, buddy, I need help. I know we haven't talked, but, can you help me out here?
Yeah.
He said, yeah. He put 2 agents on it. And so we started looking around in the girls' room. And I'm going to tell this as briefly as I can, because there are 4 or 5 little things that happen here that if they don't happen,
You lose her.
We lose her.
Yeah.
Right. The first one was, to my point earlier about people put in your life for specific purposes. He'd been in my life for 20 years. This was his purpose, was to save her life, or to coordinate coordinate the efforts to save her life. The second, miracle was they had left their phones behind because they were smart enough to know. I guess the guy told them, don't take your phones, but he gave them a burner, and they opened it in the girl's bedroom. And there's a little tiny, and I mean tiny, piece of tinfoil on the boxes of those things, and they threw that box or the little wrapper into the girl's waistband beside her bed. My wife sees the piece of foil, pulls it out. It's the serial number of the phone that they're carrying. If she doesn't see that, we never get the ability to track them, ever. If that piece of foil isn't found, we lose.
And where is that? That's in the hotel?
No, it's in that girl's house.
That's in the girl's house.
Yeah, so we went to that girl's house.
That's in Western North Carolina.
It is.
Here.
It is. And I kind of, part of my military training, I went to SEER school, survive, escape, resist, it's that crazy stuff where they teach you survival tactics and all those things. And so I said, I was trained to avoid detection, and I knew they weren't. So I kind of, walked back the path and looking for cameras and those kind of things. So we started looking around for clues, really, is what we were doing. And we were in the girl's bedroom, and my wife just looks down in the waistband, and there's this piece of foil, and so I call my buddy and say, hey, I think I got a serial number on the phone they're carrying. And he says, well, that's awesome, because their phones are in that bedroom.
Right.
And he had told me that their equipment, they could find you within 3 feet. So go ahead, you were about to say something. I'm sorry.
I was going to ask you, you guys are in Western North Carolina at the moment, and
That's
she's
correct.
in Myrtle.
We didn't know where she was at the moment.
Okay.
We found out later, probably by that time she was already in Myrtle Beach.
Okay.
By the time this is happening, she probably was in Myrtle Beach.
Okay.
We found the foil. I called my buddy back, and he advised me to go activate it on my Verizon account, but not turn it on for calls, turn it on for data only, because they would be notified if it became active, and he's afraid they would throw it away. Right. And the SBI has administrative subpoena power, so they don't need a judge. They can just issue a subpoena and say, we want the data from this phone, we want the data from this Facebook account, we want this, that, or the other. And so he was able to start issuing subpoenas to their social media accounts and those kind of things to try to get in. And he told me that once we gain access to the phone, we then can remotely turn on and off the geolocation stuff without them knowing we're doing it. And then we'll be able to start tracing them, but we got to get a hit on it first. And the first hit they got was at the house that kicked them out. That it traced back to a local house where they had planned to lay low, and they were only there a few hours until the owner of the home was like, I don't want any part of this, sends them out, and then off to Myrtle Beach they go. And
at this time, Kevin, is it just the two girls, or is it the two girls and this shady guy?
That shady guy never got a hold of them.
Okay.
So the plan got blown up with the trip to Myrtle Beach.
He was guiding them, but
he was going to guide them to stay here and then pick them up here and take them to Florida. That was the plan.
Okay.
And when they got booted, they made the decision on their own to call one of Amber's friends and pay them to take them to Myrtle Beach, which is where that girl was comfortable.
So what's the timeline here? What where it started and where you're at right now, just so the audience has an understanding of what's going on.
I think they left the house at about 2 a.m.
Okay.
And when we find this foil, it's probably 3 o'clock that first afternoon.
So you guys already had a bad feeling with that.
So within one day, you're already, you feel like something is wrong.
My gut was my senses were all over the place on it. And my buddy called me back, and after he got involved, and told me that girl was actually on their radar for her other activities.
On the SBI radar?
For her other activities. And he used the word, in our terms, she's one click away from dead.
Oh my goodness.
And so that was, I was like, oh man, this is not good. But the first hint that it was trafficking was the next day probably, or the next evening. Okay. They got a hit, and then he got another hit in Myrtle Beach, called me and said, hey, can you go down there? And their challenge was Facebook will only honor that subpoena one time, and you cannot renew it other than one every hour. And so in the hour that they had to get it renewed and reissued and that thing, they moved. So they went, they pinged at that house. They go there and they're already gone, right?
Yeah.
So then they get a ping in Myrtle Beach at a pizza place. Or initially at a resort. They go there, they're gone, and so
the SBI is going
the SBI is going there trying to find them, and they're gone. Or they're using what's called SLED. So it's the South Carolina version of the SBI, South Carolina Law Enforcement, whatever.
Okay.
And then the first hint I had something was really kind of sideways was a mention of the FBI getting involved. And I'm like, why would the FBI get involved in a runaway case? So immediately I'm going, this is
bigger than you think, or even anyone thinks.
It's bigger than I thought, bigger than anybody thinks. And so it was probably that would have been Sunday. So they ran away on Friday. We found the foil, called Brent, got to trace that, that day where they had been. And then they got a trace on Saturday morning or Sunday morning. So it was about 24 hours there that they were at the beach.
Yeah.
And asked me if I could go down there. They thought they were going to have them wrapped up. And so I get in the car with the other parents actually and hightail it down there. And, we miss him. He tells me, don't go to the resort. Well, he knows me. He's known me 20 years. He knew I was going to go to the resort, right? And I went there. We asked questions, couldn't find him. The other girl's dad was a police officer in a local community here, not like a city or whatever, but it's like a small neighborhood. But so we missed him, but they told me that when we were on the way to Myrtle Beach, he told me, he called me, he said, we missed him at the pizza parlor too, because of the Facebook thing, Mm-hmm. But the owner of the pizza parlor was creeped out by who they left with, so he got the license plate off the car.
That's miracle number 3.
Miracle number 3, right there. The guy was wigged out, like, this don't look right, And he lied to me initially. My buddy was trying to keep me calm, I think. He lied to me initially about the description of the person she got in the car with. And he told me that the next day they were going to send an officer over after the pizza parlor opened. And he told me in the afternoon, but it was open in the morning. He was trying to keep me out of the middle of the thing is what he was really trying to do, because he knew me, bull in the china shop, And so, but they were going to send an officer over to have the owner of the pizza parlor do a ID of the person they had traced the license plate back to. And he told me he was a doctor. No pun intended, clearly. In Greensboro, North Carolina, at an allergy clinic. And
so the guy that
had picked him up,
helping traffic them is a doctor.
Yeah,
that's insane.
Yeah, and so, and how he picked them up. So when they got to the beach, because of this girl's history of having relationships with older men, they logged on to, which is how they got one of the pings. They logged on to created an account on one of these, I call them sugardaddy.com websites, where young girls seeking older men, and posted an ad, hey, they posted they were 18 years old and posted their pictures and whatever. That's how he found them. That's how they got into the hands of the bad guy. Was the bad guy surfing the web, sees these 2 young girls, looking for somebody to take care of them, and he says, oh, I'll take care of you. Well, he wasn't going to take care of them.
Yeah.
So that's the terrifying part about that. And
one of the many ways that occurs.
Oh yeah. There's so many different ways that occurs, but in this situation, that's how he found them. Mm-hmm. That's how they got away from the guy that set the whole thing up initially into the hands of the mob, basically. And so I showed up at the pizza parlor the next morning. I'd been told again, don't go over there, but I don't follow instructions very well, especially when it's your kid involved. I confronted the owner of the pizza shop, and he said that he knew they were runaways, which really bothered me that he didn't call the police. He said, I just didn't want to get in the middle of it. He said, we see a lot of runaways here. Mm-hmm. And so now in my head, after, however many years later, I'm going, well, how many of those kids, they get the same situation, they don't find them, right?
Yeah.
And so
And how old is Amber at this time?
She's 15.
Wow.
Yeah, she's 15 and about to turn 16.
Wow.
So
that just puts things into perspective, you know?
Yeah.
That's,
Yeah.
you know, as a father, hearing you talk.
Actually, now I think she was 16, just turned 16.
Yeah. But that creates, you know, we talked earlier, a few podcasts back about, you know, righteous fury.
Yeah.
You know, this righteous wrath that parents who are defending their children from evil, from the evils of this world, that righteous fury rises up. I can't help it, but when I hear or see situations and instances like this where the wicked and the evil are taking advantage of those who are innocent, I think that every single believer, every single Christian should have that righteous fury that rises up within them when it comes to these things. And, you know, if you're feeling upset and angry, you should. This should make you angry, and that is the conviction of the Holy Spirit within you. That should make you angry, and we should do everything we can to combat that.
That's right. That's correct. And you know, I call my buddy. I'm standing in a pizza shop, you know, and I put my hands on the owner when he told me, you know, that and his response was, "Well, I fed them. They didn't have any money," and I was like, "Well, that's great. At least they're not hungry. You really helped a lot. You do their runaways."
Yeah.
She chose not to call the cops, but thank you for giving them a piece of pizza. You know, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I called my buddy and I said, he said, "Where are you?" And I said, "I'm standing in a pizza shop." He goes, "Why did you do that?" I said, "I needed to be the last place I knew she was alive. I needed to be here."
Yeah.
Because I was worried and I'm scared. And I said, "Can I ID him for you?" And he said, "Okay." Well, he sends me a picture and the rap sheet. And it's all misdemeanor stuff. It's nothing big. You know, there's nothing to hint of that. But, you know, the name and the picture, I immediately, because, again, at this point, I'm retired from the Air Force, 25 years in the military, highly trained on how to recognize human trafficking.
Yeah.
That's when the switch flipped. And I'm like, she's being trafficked right now. I knew it right then. And so I took my phone and shoved it in the guy's face. I said, "Is this him? Is this him?" And he goes, "Yeah, that's him." And I said, "All right." So I called my buddy and I said, "He says it's him." He says, "Okay, we've got a location that he's got a place in Charleston, South Carolina." And I said, "Well, I'm headed to Charleston." He said, "No, you're not. Do not go to Charleston." And he said, "I need you to stay there." And I said, "Okay." And I did.
So what's in Charleston? Can you?
So Charleston, he had an apartment or a condo in Charleston. He had a place in Greensboro, but
The suspect who was trafficking.
Yeah, so they weren't sure where he was at the moment, but the license plate that the guy had given him gave him, you know, some cell phone numbers to try to start tracing, and so they could try to start tracking and do what they're doing with the phone, the burner phone.
Yeah.
They were using Amber's Facebook account the few times they got online.
You said it pinged online whenever she'd went.
Yeah. So it'd ping on, and whenever they would get on, it would, you know, a router, or whatever Wi-Fi router they were on,
give a location,
you know. And so that's how they were kind of guessing where they were at. The challenge was Facebook is really hard to deal with once every hour, and they're very hard to get, you know, even in an emergency situation, they're not very forthcoming. They're just not.
Yeah.
And so I start driving around, randomly looking, you know, I'm just hoping to catch a glimpse of her, and I'm in full panic mode now because her Facebook hadn't been on for, you know, at this point about 12 hours. I thought we'd missed the window. The opportunity was gone.
And Kevin, speaking of windows, what are the statistics? Maybe you know these details. What are the statistics from the time someone is trafficked to the to when they're gone, you know, or how much time that we have or that law enforcement has to retrieve or rescue these?
What I was told by the FBI is it's normally less than 48 hours.
So you have 48 hours to get them, or they're usually gone.
They're gone. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to mention one other thing you told us was the kind of people they target, right? You said that people that have families, what happens to them versus the ones that are kind of isolated.
So I found that out in a debrief as well. Is so the traffickers are smart, right? And I when I tell this story, I ask people, "Have you ever seen the movie Taken?"
Mm-hmm.
You know, and
a lot of people
seen that, right? And I'm like, well, I didn't get to shoot any bad guys. Wish I could have, but none of that happened. But the plot of the story, where there's a good guy that's not causing them any harm, picking them up and then turning them over to the bad guys, is 100% accurate.
Right.
So while the good guy, quote unquote, is negotiating a sale, that's what he's doing, right? They're also evaluating whether the victim has a family unit at home, somebody with righteous fury, that's not going to stop ever looking for them. And in my case, the more they talk to my daughter, they're like, she's got a dad that's never going to stop. And so those victims, they get sent overseas.
That's insane.
And they get drugged and they get sent overseas, and they use them up overseas. And then the victims that they feel like don't have, you know, some kind of connectivity, they're used up here, you know, for whatever purposes, you know, sex, child slave labor, or whatever.
So basically, if the trafficked individual comes from a broken home, they keep them somewhere in the United States in drug homes or drug houses, you know, places where they can keep them. You know, I was talking about this the other day, or with somebody, about prisons. You know, prisons aren't just physical. You know, we often assume that a prison has a, you know, 4 walls and has, you know, bars on the windows. But you can lock somebody up mentally just the same. And what I mean by that is this: you know, you can physically restrain somebody, but you can chemically restrain them just the same.
Without
and so
question.
Just like a prison cell could be physical, you can put somebody's mind in a prison cell with drugs, with addictions, with things that are chemically restraining them. And instead of this trafficked individual seeking help, you might be thinking, well, why don't they just leave?
Yeah, why don't they go to the cops?
Yeah, why don't they just leave? Well, they're in prison.
Yeah.
They're just not in the kind you expect. They're not in a physical prison, but they are in a chemical prison.
Yeah.
And they come back willingly because they're in prison. Right. They're in prison.
They've got to come get their fix.
Yeah.
That's right.
They've got to come get, you know, whatever it is that they've got them addicted to. And a lot of times it's fear. Like, they may threaten, I'm going to go kill your family, or you don't know really what goes on behind the scenes to keep them from seeking help. You know, and it might shock you, but, you know, you probably, all of us, have engaged somebody who's been trafficked and just didn't know how to recognize it, didn't know how to see it. You know, that's a fact. I mean, statistically, that we know of, all right, the numbers vary dramatically. There's a low end of 345,000. This is just in 2023.
That's
okay,
insane.
And the high end number is 850,000. So you got a 500,000 person range
disappearing
that go missing.
Yeah.
Right.
That's crazy.
And statistically, I think I looked at it earlier. It is 73% are either women or girls, and then the rest are men or boys. And so there's, you know, both sexes get trafficked for different reasons. But you know, they literally could be trafficked in plain sight, and you just don't know how to recognize it. You know, I 100% think I saw one in Las Vegas last year when I was out there for one of the races, and I didn't know how to ask them. You know, they were giving off all the signs that I've been trained to see, and I didn't know how to approach them because their handler, I thought, and I saw him with 2 different girls. dressed almost identically at 2 different times at the same hotel.
Wow.
And they both were giving me this vibe of like,
Help me.
And even with what I've been through, because he was standing right there.
Yeah.
Do you think that Amber knew that something was wrong? I mean,
She did.
She did at
She
the time.
did,
I mean,
yeah.
obviously.
So and she's at the point now. She's ready to talk about this. So if we want to further this
Yeah.
conversation, she's willing to come here and talk.
Oh, for sure.
So
Her perspective.
her perspective, because it's different than mine.
Yeah.
Right? She told me that, you know, probably the first night, she's like, something's wrong here. Especially when she wanted to call her sister. She didn't want to call me because at the time she and I were like,
Not in a good relationship.
no, not in a good spot at all. And now we talk every day, and it's completely changed. But she wanted to try to call her sister and let her sister, because she thought her sister would cover for her, right?
Yeah.
You know, I'm okay. I'm out at the beach. They wouldn't let her call anybody, and smacked the phone out of her hand. And then she said that took him and got her hair done, got him makeup, bought him alcohol, never gave him drugs yet, and never did. But I firmly believe that was the plan.
16 years old, just so
Yeah.
everybody
And
remembers.
16 years old.
And this is the window. We're speaking about this 48-hour window. And since she has a family that's never going to stop looking for her, if these things don't align, you lose her forever.
Yeah, so the local police, after the rescue, told me that that she had been sold
So
for
she was already paid
So
for.
let's.
$12,000.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's get. I'd like to cover that information, but let's get back to the rescue.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
You were saying they were in. Where are they? In
So he had
Myrtle?
him in a condo that
Okay.
he told him he owned, and he was buying him alcohol, buying him food, talking about their hair done, buying them clothes, getting their nails done. And Amber said that, you know, in addition to them not letting her call, you know, she got a lot of really bad vibes because he would take pictures of them in their bikinis out by the pool and then immediately get on the phone and start talking in a foreign language. And then take
Right.
more pictures, start talking in a foreign language, take more pictures.
Negotiating?
He was negotiating. So exactly what he was doing. And so I drove around, and I know the day she was rescued was September the 14th. She left. She left on the 11th. I found out on the 12th. We found her at late in the evening on the 14th, and I had absolutely given up hope. Her Facebook account had not been online for over 24 hours.
Oh, man.
You know, because you could tell when somebody's online or
Yeah.
offline. At the time, I wasn't on Facebook. I didn't join Facebook till later, but my sisters were, and her sister was, and they were like watching that green light dot to come on to say, oh my goodness, she's online. Well, I was at dinner with a friend of mine trying to come to grips with how to tell her mom and her siblings that she's gone. I said, you know, my buddy's sitting there. He said, it's going to be all right. I said, nah, man, this is not good. And I can tell you where I was and tell you what I was eating. But I was at O'Charlie's eating tilapia and broccoli. There are certain things you never forget. And so I get a text from my sister or a call, and it said, Amber's online. Oh, wow. So my heart jumps. And I text my buddy. I text him and I said, hey.
The buddy at the SBI.
Yeah. And I said, because by this point, the FBI Human Trafficking Task Force had called me. And I had talked to them. So there's no doubt at this point what's going on. Right. And that's who had told me that Myrtle Beach was one of the number one locations on the East Coast for that activity.
That's
because
insane.
of its location between 2 major ports.
Yeah, I don't think anybody, if you're hearing that for the first time, you're like me when I heard it for the first time and was completely shocked that Myrtle Beach is one of the top human trafficking hubs on the eastern seaboard.
Yeah, and it's because Charleston is an hour to the south. There's a port. And
Is there
Wilmington-
one there as well?
Yeah, well, no, there's no port in Myrtle Beach, but in Charleston, you have the College of Charleston, which is 90% women.
Okay.
In Wilmington, there's another giant port, so they have the ability to move them. They literally put them in a container, like drug them up, put them in a container, IVs, the whole 9 yards, and send them across the ocean.
A shipping container.
A shipping container, yeah.
Just with a bunch of other thousands of containers.
Yeah,
or
exactly.
hundreds.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
That's insane.
That's how they get them out. Yep, 100%. And they're in there. You know, I don't know if somebody goes with them or how. I don't know anything about that. I don't want to know. I just know that's how they do it. So I'm at dinner. I get this ping, and I text Brent, and I say, she's online. And he said, Roger. That was one word response. And then my sister texts me back, says, she's offline. And I was like, oh my gosh. And then 3 or 4 minutes later, she said, she's back online. And so I start trying to call him, and he's just sending me a voicemail. And then she's like, she's offline. She's online. And just this brief moment of hope hit me, and it reminded me of what he had said, that once they get access, when they're ready to pounce.
When they get access to the phone.
Yeah, and then once they have access and when they're ready to move on the target, you know, whatever, they'll start geolocating. Bing, bong, bing, bong.
Turning the data on and off.
Triangulating it 3 feet.
3 feet. That's insane.
3 or 4 feet is pretty small.
Yeah.
He told me that if they come up to a house and they're, you know, executing a warrant for somebody, and they're like, hey, I'm here looking for, you know, you there. And he's like, well, he's not here. Well, his phone's on the desk in the corner over there. So where is he?
Right.
You know, so it's that accurate.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so I remembered him telling me that right before they move, that's what they do. And so I'm like, maybe this is it, you know, maybe, but I didn't want to let myself think that. Right. And I was sitting there, and my phone rang. He finally called me back, and he said, where are you at? And I said, I'm right where you told me to be. He said, all right. He said, stay by your phone. I said, okay. So now my heart's just like pounding. And it's been 8 years, 9 years. And my phone rings, and it's Myrtle Beach Police Department. And I said, Ms. Hughes, we got your daughter. I said, is she okay? And they're like, yeah, she's fine. She's fine. And I said, they said, what do you want us to do with her? And I immediately went from where I'm at right now to take her to jail. Take her to jail.
Righteous anger.
Take her to jail. And, you know, they had sent literally almost a SWAT team in there.
Yeah.
You know, she said that they didn't even, it's like a no knock, like the door just came busting open.
So she was in a house.
She was in the condo. Yes, a condo, multiplex. And he had told them that he was going to leave in the wee hours of the next morning and go on a business trip, but that they could stay there, that it was paid for, that they could stay there as long as they wanted. And he had bought a bunch of groceries and that kind of stuff. The truth is, he was going to drug them.
Wow.
The deal was done. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It was over. And he was going to leave them. And then, just like in the movie, the bad guys are going to come in
and get them.
And they're gone. That's how close we were. You know,
Wow.
This was at 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. And he's telling them I'll be gone in the wee hours of the morning. That's how close we were. And we were way outside that 48 hours at this point. You know? And so go to the jail, and, you know, I peel her away. First, I confront the other girl because, you know, one of my, you know, NASCAR buddies, like I said, had posted a tweet that, you know, got interacted with over 3 million times. So, I mean, as soon as he...
In regards to finding her?
Mm-hmm.
What did the tweet say?
So I posted one initially, and after the fact I was told that was a bad idea because I had actually endangered her. Because
make people aware, right?
Yeah, so
or the sex traffickers.
So we actually exactly. So here we had put up posters like picture her and the other girl. Have you seen this call? And then I put a tweet out there at the time and said, hey, this, you know, any missing girls, you know, any help, call, you know, this number. And I missed the race. And my buddy Rodney saw the tweet. The race, it was in Richmond, Virginia, and he was after the race was over. He's, you know, I guess he's sitting there waiting to get on the airplane. He scrolls Twitter and he sees my tweet, and he texts me and he said, "Hey man, you up?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm up." And he said, "Everything okay?" And I said, "No." And he knew about what we'd been through with her. He knew about the suicide attempts and her self-harm. She'd cut herself, and so he knew our battles. And he said, "What can I do for you?" And I was like, "Man, I don't know." I said, "Retweet it," And at the time, he had, he had just won the Sprint Cup championship with Kevin Harvick the year prior, and so he's a big name in the sport. Still is a big name in the sport. Mm-hmm. And he retweeted it and said, he put a note on it: "Personal friend, close to my heart. Please help. Please retweet." Well, within 30 minutes, a who's who of NASCAR had done that. Mm-hmm. Dale Jr., Jeff Gordon, Jimmy Johnson, Kyle Busch, all those guys reposted Rodney's tweet because of who he is.
Those are big names too.
You think?
Yeah, those are. I'm not a big NASCAR fan, but I know those names.
Those names, right?
Yeah.
And the Myrtle Beach Police Department told me they got calls on that.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to say that without Rodney's tweet that we wouldn't have found them.
Yeah.
But in my heart, I kind of want to believe that. But but I walk in the room and I confront the other girl. I was like, "Did you really think we wouldn't find you?" And I asked her, I said, "Did she not tell you about some of my friends?" And I just straight up told her, I said, "Your picture's been seen 3.2 million times in the last 2 days. You think you were going to get away?" And she just looked at me. And I mean, I said some other things I probably wish I hadn't said to her, but heat of the moment, right?
Yeah.
You've just been through just an incredible situation. And so peel Amber off, make sure she's okay. And then they authorized me to take her home. And then my buddy, because of that other girl's, situation, he put a bunch of red tape in place. And so they weren't allowed to bring her home for about 90 days to keep them apart. And then he went as far as, I won't tell you the name of the person because he redacted, Amber's name doesn't appear on that police report. It's redacted, because people that, might want to try to find her, right?
Right.
If they can tie it to that event. So, yeah, I mean, September 15th, we celebrate a second birthday, I call it. She woke up in a hotel room alive with her dad and not in a shipping container on her way overseas.
Yeah.
Amen.
So, and God did that. And on the way home, we talked a lot about, God saving her. I mean, I knew it then, and I was still wandering then, right? I wasn't grounded.
Yeah.
But
God was saving you
God
too,
was
right?
saving. He was working on me. I'm hard-headed.
I mean, he was. Yeah.
I tell people a lot, God doesn't, he's got to build a wall. I'm like a bull, right? So he's literally got to build an impenetrable wall, because what I want's on the other side of it, I'm going to try to knock it down, right? So he's got to make it where I can't knock the wall down. And so it took a while after that for that to happen in this situation for me to want to share that. I knew within 6 months that he wanted me to share the story, right?
Right.
Because it was evident that it was his hand through the whole process that had saved her life. And on the way home, I was able to, for the very first time, witness to my daughter and talk about, she's in her response was, "Dad, all the bad things I've done. There's no way God wants me." And I reminded her of most of the most influential people in the Bible have a very colored past,
right?
A very checkered past.
Yeah.
Because they've got the biggest story to tell. You can see the biggest change in them. Moses, David, you can go on and on and on and on about how God uses these imperfect people to accomplish his perfect goal.
Yeah. And
so she came home, sought some counseling, 3 or 4 months later got saved.
Amen.
Was baptized, and then the devil really went to work on her,
Always happens like that,
to the point, that I made earlier. Once you're off the table, you're off the table, right?
Right.
Once she was out of the table, she was off the table. But man, what a story that kid's got to tell.
Yeah.
And now she's ready. It's taken her this long. She's been through addiction, alcoholism, all this stuff. And there's other instances where God has literally physically saved her life since that happened.
Wow.
And she doesn't deny it. Now she's ready to talk. And now the more she gets ready to talk, the more she gets stacked.
Yeah.
Just like me,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I was going to ask you one last question. We're going to wrap up.
No.
Within this testimony, how did God impact your faith? I know it took a couple more years for you to get closer to God, but what in those moments of God's grace within your life impacted you the most? What made you realize God's love over your life? Because we're gonna have another podcast about your son, which is very difficult.
Yeah.
But I'd like you to talk about the outcome of what happened here.
He just showed me that nothing's too big for him to handle, whether it's physically, spiritually, mentally, and he over the years since then, before I returned to who I am today, and I'm still learning every day. I'm still growing. I still make, just like every other Christian, you make a mistake every day. I got to go home tonight, get on my knees, say, God, forgive me, right?
Yeah.
That's part of grace. That's part of forgiveness. And I felt guilty, like I didn't deserve that miracle. So, but he kept comforting me. No, there's a purpose for that. I need you to tell this story.
Yeah.
Because whether you're a believer or not a believer, this is a real epidemic, pandemic, whatever you want to call it in our society that needs to be addressed. And there's so many different factors that drove us to that situation that are becoming more prevalent in our society. And so he's put that burden on my heart to talk about addiction, to talk about social media, to talk about absent parents, to talk about all these things that are all factors in her being in my own failures. I am now willing to open up all my failures in the past. He's humbled me. So he's humbled me.
Well, Kevin, I just want to say that you doing that, you taking that step of faith, and sharing maybe your failures or even the things you've gone through, that's going to be a testimony for young fathers, young men who are listening to this, who, might take some of those lessons and apply them for their own lives.
That's 100% the goal.
And, I think that that's how God wins through this testimony.
That's right.
You mentioned, you counted 5 miracles. I counted 6. Yeah. The greatest of which was your daughter coming to the faith. And salvation is the greatest miracle that happens to any one of us. I mean, we can list off miracle after miracle of God being faithful in our lives, but where he's really come through is when he's called us to himself.
Saved soul.
Yeah. And I love that you mentioned that you shared the gospel with your daughter. You shared, that love of God with your daughter.
Yeah.
And she received that. And that to me is the greatest miracle. Those other things you mentioned, they are incredible. But the greatest thing is what you ended with.
I told her on the way home, I said, Amber, there's a purpose here. You were just saved by God, and there's a purpose. Don't know what it is yet, but we'll figure it out. And I've told her that all these years, I said, my job is I'm the chain and you're the wrecking ball for the devil, right?
Come on.
That's what I tell her, right? I'm the chain, you're the wrecking ball. I'll tell my side. It's impactful. My side is impactful, right? To a father, to a parent, to talk about don't trust that your kids are getting the right guidance if they're not getting it from you.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? Stay engaged, even because they're going to fight you tooth and nail. They don't want you in their business, but you've got to overcome
their
that
business,
and you've got to get past trying to be their friend and be a parent, right? Her story, that's the wrecking ball. And I've asked her, I was like, the way I've coached her and counseled her and prayed for her is that if 12-year-old or 13-year-old Amber met 25-year-old Amber, would it make a difference in her choices? And she said, yeah. I said, there's your answer.
Yeah.
Amen.
You've got to find the strength and the ability to share your side, and now she's ready. She's going to do it.
Amen. Kevin, thank you so much for sharing
Kevin,
your testimony with us.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
And we're going to finish up this podcast, but just to let everyone know, we're going to have another portion of this podcast about your son.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of grievances, but how God can work through that as well.
Yeah. How to trust God when you don't.
Yeah.
Amen.